I am just so tired of it. The past was difficult. For example, people constantly glorify the world wars, but those events were terrifying. People were dying by the millions. The same goes for the Old West and other glorified historical eras. We have moved on from old habits because they were not beneficial. Story 1 depends on the context. Individuals promoting manliness as a product are obnoxious and can be safely ignored. Older men who express concern for our well-being and desire to see us succeed, gain confidence, act with integrity, and learn resilience are commendable. I believe that is healthy. Story 2. For me, masculinity involves taking responsibility, helping others, solving problems, and taking calculated risks. You must be a pillar for others and be willing to endure some challenges while doing so. Story 3. Anyone else noticing that people are having trouble distinguishing online social media chatter curated by an artificial intelligence from real life? Story 4. Well, I think the point is that the world wars, specifically World War II, were difficult, but the men fought on to defend their families and loved ones. Story 5. Nobody is saying the deaths and brutality of World War II are what we need. We need the courage and character of those who were forced to fight in it. Story 6. Imagine the backlash someone would face for saying, well, a real woman would. Yet, people in general, especially manipulative individuals, do not hesitate to define real men by their standards of behavior and shame men for not conforming. Listen, whether you approve of my attitudes and actions or not, they represent the attitudes and actions of a real man, regardless of your thoughts or feelings. Story 7. I understand your concerns. The conversation around needing to be real men can be exhausting. It often stems from outdated stereotypes and toxic masculinity. Being a real man should not mean conforming to a narrow, traditional ideal. It should mean being authentic, respectful, and true to oneself. We should encourage people to be the best versions of themselves, regardless of outdated gender norms. It's 2024. Let's focus on being good humans instead. Story 8. Not exactly what that means. Most people my age, early 20s, including myself, have little confidence. Many lack general integrity, and a lot of us have never done any kind of home improvement project at all. Story 9. Those were tough, mature men who fought in those wars and worked through challenging times, achieving impressive accomplishments. They also died young, and the combat veterans experienced horrible memories and nightmares for the rest of their lives. If we change from real men to mature men, that's different. We can definitely use more of them. Story 10. I don't have anyone in my life who talks like this, so I can't relate to this post at all. Maybe you are following unusual content on social media. If so, consider stopping that. Story 11. Masculinity is necessary for healthy communities and families. Keeping your spouse in the kitchen or resorting to violence over every disagreement is not a healthy expression of masculine behavior. Standing up for yourself, taking care of yourself and your family, and serving your community are all important parts of a healthy society. We sometimes forget that heroic masculinity is not far removed from what is often labeled toxic masculinity. For example, my neighbor across the road and I have always had our differences. Although no angry words were ever exchanged, we have had disagreements regarding his dogs and my teenage sons, as well as shared frustrations about another neighbor who lives a quarter-mile away. We are unlikely to become friends. I find him abrasive and he finds me disagreeable. However, 2 years ago, my garage caught fire on a cold winter night due to an old space heater I had used to prevent the plumbing from freezing. I was out with family for dinner when I returned to find his truck in my driveway. He was fighting the fire with his fire extinguisher and my garden hose. The fire department arrived a few minutes later and finished the job. It was his actions that made their effort significant. He saved everything of value in that garage, including a tractor and all my lawn equipment. The point is, the same fundamental trait that makes him abrasive to me is also what motivated him to fight my fire when all my other neighbors had, at most, called the fire department. The truth is that grown men who are not friends or bonded through family ties might not always get along. That doesn't mean you can't respect them or help them when they need it. That's healthy masculinity. My neighbor acted to save my property because he felt it was the right thing to do as a man and a neighbor, not because we were or ever will be friends. Story 12. We need to be real men again, but not in a cowboy way. We should be there as husbands, fathers, and friends to support one another. Story 13. As a veteran, I know plenty of people who went through combat, and it didn't make them men. It shattered them. The whole be real men mentality is obnoxious at best. I wish all these so-called alpha males would go back to where they came from. The immense idiocy that is spreading should worry everyone. These individuals are undoing decades of progress and bringing back destructive and foolish ideas. Just for your information, prior to World War I, there was a long period of relative peace. Many in the older generation who had never fought in a war believed that sending their boys off to war would make them into real men. This was a major factor in the popular support for World War I in much of Europe. Even deep into the war, those same individuals thought their boys would come home better for it. Instead, every country had a whole generation wiped out. Story 14. Call it what you want, but we could certainly benefit from more stoicism and less indulgence in our negative emotions. Story 15. Being a man means handling your responsibilities and taking care of things yourself, rather than relying on someone else. Many men today struggle with basic tasks and feel helpless as a result. This lack of self-reliance is neither empowering nor attractive. Claiming that the world has changed does not imply that traditional values of self-reliance and masculinity are no longer relevant or desired, particularly by women. Story 16. It depends on what real men means this time. I'm in my 40s and have lost count of how many versions there are of how a real man should be. If it's about young men having social skills, dating, having relationships, and stopping the self-diagnosis of being on the spectrum, we need more of that discussion. Story 17. As a man who has been to war, I can tell you it is terrible. I would not wish war on anyone. It is utterly dehumanizing. If a younger generation does not have to see their best friends harmed or die, witness injured children, or live in fear for their lives, I am all for it. I experienced that, and I do not know if it made me a better man. Story 18. We need to be real men again, just as every generation before us has sought to do. People have been expressing this for thousands of years, and it has never ceased. Holding ourselves to an idealized standard that we may never achieve, but can continually strive toward, is an excellent path to self-improvement. However, the past is largely filled with nightmares and lies that we should never attempt to replicate. Story 19. I am not sick of it at all because it is completely true, even if it is not your description. Young men being chronically online and addicted to video games is a significant issue. They are avoiding real life more than previous generations because escapism is easier than ever. This problem is only going to worsen if things continue this way. Sitting on the sidelines of life does not mean you do not play. It means you lose. Story 20. Being real men again does not mean starting wars and destroying things. It is about being strong, having a creed to live by, taking care of your family, and protecting those you love and those who cannot protect themselves. Story 21. Masculinity has its place, but it may not resonate with everyone. Life is a blend of various experiences. Embrace all of them. Not everything needs approval from critics to be socially accepted. Story 22. As a man born at the tail end of the era in question, consider how well that worked out for the so-called real men. They died 7 years sooner than their partners. They were far more likely to commit suicide than women, with a significant increase in that probability if they identified as anything other than heterosexual. They were very likely to enter their later years, if they lived that long, with chronic pain from workplace or sports injuries due to inadequate treatment. They faced a higher likelihood of addiction issues. They were often emotionally cut off from their families, unable to discuss their feelings, and therefore unable to heal from trauma. Indeed, it seems like a regular golden age. I cannot wait to return to that time. Story 23. I don't understand how you equate being a real man with the world wars. However, we need more people who are accountable for their actions and do not blame others. We could certainly use more of that. The concept of participation trophies has taken away many of those values. Story 24. Recognize it for what it is. They think their audience is uninformed and insecure. Western society does lack conventional rites of passage into adulthood. It is understandable for someone to have a comfortable life their entire life. To be an elderly person and never experience actual hunger is to not know a part of yourself. This was not possible for a majority of society even 100 years ago. We do not have a mechanism like sending boys out to hunt and them realizing something has to die so they can eat. No rite of passage trauma. School is not it, work is not it, and moving out is not it. Having children serves this purpose for many. This is a new territory, and being able to compartmentalize childish ways is easier with a clear divide between being a boy and being a man, between being a child and being an adult, between being fed and being a provider. There is a market for people wanting this. We will not combat it by mocking certain communities. They romanticize the recent times when this has been possible. However, there are other ways to achieve growth. For me, it was experiencing altered states of consciousness and then some further clarity when I became an uncle. I have no clear idea on how to fix this. I tend to ramble. Story 25. Nobody glorifies the wars themselves, especially World War I. Instead, they honor the men who answered the call when the country faced an existential threat. Are you seriously trying to argue that risking one's life to combat fascism is problematic and that it would be beneficial to abandon that old habit? Story 26. The real men in my life were alcoholics, divorced, and argued against global warming as if they would earn a medal, even though none of them could explain the science. I love each of them dearly, but they could be difficult. I want to be a different kind of man. Story 27. It depends. Often, people don't imply anything beyond the strength of previous generations when facing overwhelming negative life circumstances. I believe it is clearly true that increased mental toughness in the world will be beneficial. Story 28. That is what made them men in the first place. Even in the face of wars and economic downturns, they felt compelled to fulfill their duty to provide for and protect their families. Today, it is not uncommon to see children growing up without fathers, and evidence suggests that fatherless children are more likely to engage in criminal behavior and experience suicidal thoughts later in life. Story 29. My answer is that being a modern man means following your own path in a world that often dictates how a man should behave. Story 30. The definition of what a real man is depends on your situation and background. For me, being a smart, self-sufficient adult without having to rely on others for basic tasks is part of being a man. Knowing how to maintain your home and avoiding paying for a professional unless it's a major repair is important. I also learned how to remodel houses, a skill set in my family that is recognized as part of being a man. However, as I became a father, I had to expand that definition of being a real man. Being a dad requires you to be more because your actions affect your children's development. For me, doing my best to provide for my family and being the best dad for my daughter, so I can be a positive influence in her life, defines a real man in my eyes. Story 31. I believe it is human nature to compare ourselves to others. However, maturity involves accepting those differences. Story 32. Don't be so quick to think the present can't become as brutal as the past. There is a generation of Ukrainians and Russians lost, their bodies still warm. You may think you have a choice when the world falls apart, but you do not. Story 33. People who use the phrase real men are not real men by their own standards. Looking at my uncle, who doesn't know how to use a hammer, reinforces this idea. The ones who show genuine concern, want to help, and are willing to take action are the real men. Story 34. Why are you putting yourself in situations where you might encounter this kind of rhetoric? You can choose which parts of the internet to engage with, and you can also choose not to engage with certain individuals. Story 35. I don't think anyone is glorifying the world wars because they thought the wars themselves were admirable or not objectively terrifying. They are glorifying the bravery and perseverance of the individuals who fought in those wars, and of all the people who lived during those times, because the world was such a harsh place back then. I hope that the world never has to experience anything like the world wars or the other various atrocities of the 20th century ever again. That doesn't mean we can't have reverence for the people who lived through it, recognize the levels of greatness that humans can achieve when necessary, and strive to be great while also being appreciative of the fact that we now live in a world where that is not what is required of us for survival. Story 36. I find it interesting that a modern-day football team, at least at the college level and above, if placed on the same field, would put those 1950s tough guys in the emergency room. Toughness is relative to the situation. Paul Bear Bryant's Junction Boys probably couldn't hold up against a modern-day running back achieving 40 yards after contact. They would forfeit their toughness card quickly. Story 37. It is easy to romanticize times we did not live through, and men, in particular, are told that expressing feelings is a sign of weakness. However, repressing your emotions is one of the worst things you can do. It is not only unhealthy, it can be dangerous. It is imperative that when someone tells you to man up or suck it up or to repress what you are feeling, you shut them down completely and challenge them to express their feelings, giving them permission to feel whatever they are feeling. If we do not help each other deal with our feelings and support one another while dismantling the harmful belief that men should not express how they feel, we will never evolve beyond our current state in society. Story 38. I completely agree with you. I am not interested in basing my life choices on what others define as a real man. Story 39. The people who usually glorify war are those who have never experienced it, never served in any armed forces, and were born after the war ended, avoiding national service. Story 40. Real men wouldn't say such things. Real men teach, display patience for others, tell stories, and help the community. Those who advocate for machismo, bury feelings, subjugate women, and engage in violence are misguided. From what I have seen, working mostly with men, violence and mistreatment towards others is a significant issue. It's not merely competition. There are daily assaults such as teasing, racism, perfectionism, and an overly competitive spirit, including bragging about not taking breaks. Men are shaped by other men, want to be a real man, help others, listen to them, hold space for someone going through a divorce or a coworker with health issues, buy each other lunch, be a decent human being. Story 41. The thing that frustrates me the most is the idea that strong men lead to good times, which lead to weak men, resulting in hard times. What troubles me about those who promote this idea is that they identify either weak men or hard times from their perspective. They seem to believe they are the strong ones in this scenario, which makes no sense in the context of their chosen phrase. The simply and empty saying. Similarly, when people claim we should bring back real men, I argue they never disappeared. Instead, selfish and irresponsible behavior has become more acceptable in society. Story 42. Nobody tells me how to be a man, and I don't tell anyone else. Get over yourself and get yourself right. Story 43. I think the real men were the ones who had to adopt a certain mentality in order to survive the mind-breaking horror of war. Story 44. In my experience, it is often used as a rallying cry by people who feel that recent developments in our society have led to a certain feminization of men. My issue with this claim is that I believe it has been weaponized by certain politicians to divide people into categories of real men and others, which seems arbitrary. The statement, "You're not a real man if you do X, Y, Z" is quite strange, especially when X, Y, Z refer to harmless behaviors such as not adhering to traditional roles in relationships. It is concerning to think that if your wife makes more money than you, if you are a stay-at-home dad, or if you take on more domestic responsibilities with your children, you are somehow less of a man. Furthermore, many of these individuals seem to imply that being anything other than heterosexual automatically classifies you as a non-real man. This attitude is unnecessary and unwelcoming. I would not feel as uncomfortable with that sentiment if many of those who express it did not default to rigid and outdated views of what manhood entails. It is perfectly acceptable to be uninterested in sports, cars, or even women. It is okay to refrain from engaging in locker room conversations. It is acceptable to speak respectfully about your spouse in front of your coworkers. It is fine to have female friends. It is okay to dislike beer. It is perfectly normal to be interested in fashion, to enjoy musicals, and to appreciate female artists. It is also okay to discuss what weighs on your mind. In my household, you are welcome to be yourself, regardless of whether you fit the traditional mold of a real man. If you like it, I appreciate it. Story 45. Reject the nonsense and embrace that which is good. Discernment, like any worthy skill, requires time and focus, trial and error, and applied learning. Masculinity is not defined by the wrongs that men do. It is more adequately and accurately defined by the good that men do. Take good care of yourself, your mind, and your body. Reject negativity and eat healthier food. Eat less. Take a daily multivitamin and get an annual physical, especially after age 25. Ensure it includes a prostate-specific antigen test every year. Practice good hygiene. Brush and floss. This is important. Be where you are supposed to be when you are supposed to be there, both physically and mentally. If you have a family and your child has an event at school where parents are encouraged to attend, that is where you need to be, present and off your phone. Enjoy the moment and love your spouse through that presence and sharing of experiences. If you're married, you belong at home after work, not out with friends. This is important. Wash the dishes if she cooked dinner, and wash them if you cooked. If you have children, she may be working harder than you. This is important. Attend to your obligations and responsibilities. This may mean working a job you do not enjoy for a time. Do not endure it for too long. Be smart and develop skills that make you employable and desirable. Make yourself indispensable through engagement and performance. Pay your bills on time and avoid excessive unsecured debt. This is important. Adore your wife and ensure she knows you think she is the most beautiful woman you've ever seen and that it is a privilege to grow with her. This is important. Maintain your vehicles. They transport your most precious items. This is important. Read. Give anonymously. Love. Call your mother occasionally. As your parents age, take care of them and take care of your wife's parents. Avoid television programs, especially news. It's often not worthwhile. Play an instrument if you are inclined or engage in other interests that are uniquely yours, and do them well. Intermittently fast, especially as you age. After age 50, consider not eating until 2 p.m., or even limit yourself to one meal a day if you are otherwise healthy. This is important. Story 46. I haven't seen or heard anyone mention this for a good 15 years until this post. Perhaps it's time to find new people to spend time with. Story 47. Anyone who uses the phrase real men is often trying to persuade you to do something that benefits them rather than you. Additionally, everyone's definition of a real man varies and typically reflects their own interests. For example, as a gamer who grew up in a working-class environment in the 1990s, I viewed gamers as outcasts, believing that real men would not waste time playing video games. Express this viewpoint to anyone under the age of 35, and observe how many will resist it. Story 48. This resonates with me because my son, who is 25, wanted to join the Marines and often speaks of the past hardships in a glorified manner. I think it is difficult for men today because they don't have the same outlets to express their masculinity as previous generations. Story 49. Honor, duty, and country are important, but self-confidence, a growth mindset, kindness, manners, healthy habits, meaningful relationships, and civic-mindedness are my aspirations as a man. The materialistic, sexist, posturing, and toxic mentality is unappealing to me. Story 50. I am aware of the negative aspects mentioned, such as toxic masculinity. There is nothing wrong with living a healthy lifestyle, but there is nothing manly about excessive drinking, shooting for the sake of shooting, or the need to control everything. Story 51. Men have been feminized, and masculinity has been demonized as toxic. Society is worse for it. The negative aspects you mentioned did not end because men are less masculine now. They diminished because society changes over time and learns from its mistakes. Nobody glorifies the world wars. They honor the bravery of those who left their families and countries to fight tyranny, prevent genocide, and defend the right of people to express their opinions online. There are fewer men today willing to do that than in several generations past. This is not encouraging for the future of humanity. Story 52. I believe people need to stop being weak, and that applies to both men and women. There are too many individuals in this new generation who want everything handed to them. Story 53. Yeah, it really sounds like they're saying we want to go backwards. There is nothing wrong with being a real man, but there was plenty wrong with the past. Story 54. It's true regardless of whether people are tired of it. If the first thing you associate with being a real man is the world wars, you are among those addressed in this message. Your relationship with your own masculinity appears to be severely distorted and damaged. Story 55. Maybe you should focus on the message without being influenced by their politics and products. At the core, we should strive to be genuine and better individuals. We should have good character, values, and strength. Right now, it seems there are mostly whiners, complainers, easily manipulated individuals, people pleasers, and secretly toxic individuals. The point of referencing the past is that people back then faced far greater challenges than we do now. They didn't get to complain. Somehow, they built a society and families and held values. We may not share them now, but they had values. On average, what do we stand for now? We don't seem to know. Story 56. It seems that as more people came out as gay or lesbian, the right focused on masculinity and femininity. Since they do not approve of that lifestyle, they decided that men should be more masculine, like Josh Hawley. Come on, be a good person, regardless of gender. Story 57. I am absolutely tired of it. I was a target for those so-called real men while growing up. Never again. Story 58. It seems to me that being a real man starts with deciding for yourself what constitutes a real man. Story 59. I have been tired of that for decades. Everything from your music isn't real to do you even chop wood? It's June. I'm not using the fireplace. Story 60. The glorifying war is the most senseless one. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II and returned home with post-traumatic stress disorder, self-medicating with large amounts of alcohol. Both were abusive to their families. My paternal grandfather was so severely affected that he was regularly institutionalized, underwent electroconvulsive therapy multiple times, and was on antipsychotic medication for decades. Real men? My maternal grandfather brought home an income while my grandmother managed the household and raised children. He spent the rest of his time in a recliner with a glass of scotch watching television. I work full-time, take care of my child, and do my share of housework. By that metric, I'm doing twice what my grandfather did. I also don't abuse my wife and child, so maybe that's where I fall short on manliness. Story 61. People who talk about real men are often sexist or not the kind of people I connect with. I believe individuals should be free to be who they want to be. Story 62. Remember the hair metal and spandex of the 1970s, the wigs and gowns of the 1800s, and the tight pants of a certain French king in the 1500s? What about the Greeks and their togas? It is all a distraction that glorifies negative behavior. Men have been bakers and homemakers since the beginning of time. They just want to manipulate you. Story 63. Ending all those terrifying events and the world we live in today were brought about by those real men. How do you think we got here in the first place? Story 64. Real men take responsibility for themselves. Real men take pride in their work. Real men care for their families. Real men focus on being good people and improving themselves and their situations rather than worrying about what others think. They know the most important opinions are those of their families and themselves. They don't have to live for anyone else, so those opinions do not matter. Lastly, real men strive to make the world a better place for others, lift up those who are down, help those who are suffering, and soothe those who are hurting. Anything else is irrelevant. It does not matter what kind of vehicle you drive or if it is a truck. It does not matter what your wage is, or your height or weight. It does not matter if you are at the top or at the bottom. It does not matter how big your house is or how much you can dominate others. Too much of being a real man is simply toxic masculinity repackaged. Story 65. Anytime someone starts talking about being a real man, I dismiss them as someone who is obviously compensating for something. Story 66. For anyone who wants to know what masculinity and chivalry actually looked like in the past, watch this. Story 67. They do not glorify wars. They glorify what they have been forced into. When you depend entirely on your friends and they on you, honor becomes paramount. Your word and your integrity are your greatest assets. Those are the values that have fallen out of fashion. Yesterday's world was filled with lions. Today's world is filled with weasels. Story 68. I'm not sure if men need to step up at this point. They come on online forums and complain about not being able to get dates. By nature, we are wired to be attractive due to our masculinity and ability to protect, not to run away and cry on social media. We are in a time where it is common to feel lonely or experience mental stress. But this does not absolve you from your responsibilities as a male. My wife is very independent and assertive, more so than I am, just a typical Ukrainian woman who has shown great strength in difficult situations. However, she has often told me to be a man. As a Slavic woman, she appreciates sensitivity and compassion, but she does not want to see vulnerability in men. As a woman, she wants to be treated with respect, and sometimes a man needs to take control to help her feel protected and valued. I have been working on finding balance because my experiences have made me somewhat hesitant around women. Story 69. There are many reasons that the traditional mode of masculinity has diminished, and the material conditions that created it have changed. Even if social conditions evolve, economic and technological conditions may remain constant. You cannot step into the same river twice. Energy would be better spent defining a new masculinity for the 21st century, free from the limitations of the past. Story 70. We need to be real men. Like when we were forced into war to die and have no innate worth unless we sacrifice our lives in some way. We need to bring back being miserable. Not that this does not still happen, because it does in many places. Story 71. I believe there are distorted views of masculinity and feminism shaped by individuals who don't grasp their true meaning. These misconceptions are absorbed by impressionable young people seeking role models. Real masculinity and femininity are admirable. Anyone who tells you to be a real man doesn't understand what that truly means. Story 72. Not sure where you're hearing this talk about manliness, but words have meaning which can be nuanced. I would be curious what they mean by real men. Is it anti-transgender talk? Is it gender role talk? Is it about drinking more beer and whiskey? Is it about using more foul language? Is it about believing women shouldn't be in the workplace? If it's about war, as implied, ask them if women should be in the military and if they support the draft. To be fair, I believe war is heading to the United States in the near future for various reasons. Story 73. I believe there is a difference between a man and a boy. A man will protect you. A boy will not. A man will support you emotionally. A boy will not. A man will fix things for you. A boy will not. A man will build a family home. A boy will not. A man will love you. A boy will not. If I had to choose, I would prefer to see more men in this world than boys. The same can be said about women and girls. Story 74. I have very rarely met a man by his own definition, so that term has always been meaningless to me. Story 75. When discussing real men, are they still referring to being the sole provider? If so, I think it is practically impossible given the current cost-to-income ratios. Story 76. Humans respond to incentives. I hear the same nonsense and ignore it. The incentives that promoted that behavior as the male standard have long since passed. The incentives available now reward hypergamy for the most attractive and isolation for the rest of us. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. As a society, the incentives that fostered traditional masculinity are generally considered to be toxic. Fine, I honestly do not care. Without those incentives, such behavior has no benefit and has stopped appearing as frequently, except for the most attractive. This is not some great mystery. It is a manufactured diversion to foster division between two groups, men and women, while the wealthy take advantage of us through income inequality. Story 77. I dislike any discussion of real men do X. It doesn't matter what they are asserting. All men are real men. Story 78. There is a reason for this talk. There is nothing new about weak and effeminate behavior. Nero apparently used to dress in women's clothing. Story 79. The toxic aspects of masculinity were amplified because they were more attention-grabbing and effective in advertising on this new television device, prompting companies to market products like Lucky Strikes. This trend only grew as more people adopted the technology. When individuals began to recognize the extent of this issue, steps were taken to rectify the situation. This felt like a personal attack to those who had grown up believing the harmful aspects were normal, and unscrupulous individuals manipulated people for their own gain. This is where we are now. Eventually, a balance will be achieved, and men will relax somewhat. Story 80. It's a little better than asking why I feel so alone even though all I do is sit at a computer and complain all day. No one wants to go out with me because of societal pressures. Even though I haven't gone outside my house for more than an hour a day in 5 years. My passion is video games. I don't want to work. People shouldn't have to work because of automation. I feel anti-work. Why do I feel alone, bored, and that life is meaningless? Story 81. I agree that as an imaginary man, I aspire one day to break free from this abstract world and become a real man. I wonder what it feels like to have a physical form. Story 82. Nobody is glorifying the wars. They are celebrating the patriotic duty of all the young men who served. Most of them volunteered. If a war broke out today, most young men would be running to Canada. People were genuinely proud of their countries back then, proud enough to fight for them. And sure, there was a lot of negative aspects too. But that is not the only thing people focused on. They concentrated more on the good rather than the bad and on what was worth saving. Story 83. I really don't know what you are talking about. What do real men have to do with world wars? Honestly, I am sick of everything. This reality is becoming quite disappointing. Story 84. You know what would help? Stop calling masculinity toxic all the time. It's not. It never was. The more you insist that it is, the more people will complain about how weak and sensitive men are now. I don't like the real man concept, but it's become more common because of opposing narratives that are presented as truth these days. I'm tired of people saying we need real men again, but I'm also tired of people claiming there is something wrong with being a man outside of the specific way they define it. Story 85. Like anything else that plays with the no true Scotsman fallacy, it requires a single definition of what a man is, or at least what masculinity is. Typically, this is a stereotype about ruggedness, authority, and being the head of the household. Reality operates differently. Men of all types, attitudes, and roles are men by virtue of chromosomes. There are no fake men. Story 86. Read the Bible, my friend. I'm not trying to make this religious or anything, but a lot of these things happen in the Bible, and it will make you a better person. Story 87. What do you mean again? I've been real my whole life, and a man since the day I reached adulthood. Story 88. There is a fine line. We have normalized therapy culture a bit too much and become hyper-focused on our traumas and insecurities. This applies to everyone, not just men. However, part of the cultural definition of being a man is the ability to compartmentalize difficult emotions and carry on in the face of distress. Learning to do this builds resiliency and is valued as a masculine trait. Nonetheless, we should also accept men crying or struggling to confront their emotions. Research shows that activities such as lifting weights and spending time outdoors are very beneficial for mental health. While these activities are not strictly masculine, many influencers promote them to an excessive degree. Still, there is truth in their messages. I support moving towards a balanced, centrist approach to masculinity in the traditional sense. We don't all need to hunt, fish, and engage in reckless behavior to be men, but I do want to see a revival of tough self-love in modern society. Story 89. Like others have said, it depends on the context. However, I tend to agree with the familiar quote, "Hard times create strong individuals. Strong individuals create good times. Good times create weak individuals. Weak individuals create hard times." From this context, it certainly feels like we are in the weak individuals create hard times phase. Story 90. I tell my family that we are currently living through the easiest 50 years in the history of humanity. Anything we want is available, food is affordable, and everything is accessible year-round. Personal safety is at an all-time high, and medical care is advanced and widely available. We live in a world that poses numerous risks to our safety from birth, using countless methods, many of which we do not notice until it is too late. Yet here we are, living longer and better than ever, while people complain that we are not giving the world a better chance to harm us. Story 91. Men need to be genuine for real women. That's beneficial, but don't put in the effort and then settle for someone less deserving. The trend of unrealistic expectations in relationships needs to be addressed. Story 92. We are not beyond world wars. It is likely that we will face another one within 10 years. The Western world triumphed and established a successful and free group of nations because of those strong leaders. Do you think that can happen again? Consider how masculinity is often mocked today and the type of men that our culture is producing. Do you honestly believe we will navigate global conflicts and warfare intact? It is not a matter of if, but when. Story 93. Even though it is almost cliché at this point, I believe in the saying, easy times make weak individuals make hard times make strong individuals, and strong individuals make easy times. Story 94. I'm just tired of people constantly discussing how my wood splitting and shotgun shooting interests need to be justified because I believe women are individuals. Story 95. I suspect they may be talking about men who are comfortable finding middle-class women to pay all the bills and do all the housework while they sit back and play video games, relying on their partners to support their habits. I'm definitely not saying that all men do this, but in certain industries it's frustratingly common. Story 96. First, define what a man is. What is the role of gender, behavior, and so on? Men are often nurtured by females, and certain characteristics are passed to men by women. Additionally, many wars have been initiated because of women. There were numerous female leaders in earlier times, including Viking women who were real warriors. We should stop placing blame on men and recognize the true nature of human behavior. Story 97. I find it frustrating when there are calls for traditional masculinity while traditional femininity is overlooked. Personally, I have disengaged from the expectations of how either gender should behave. However, it is disheartening to hear women discuss traditional men in one breath while emphasizing that they do not owe anything in return. This creates a sense of insult, as it feels cynical to want the benefits without acknowledging the responsibilities. It seems like an attempt to have it both ways without any effort to disguise that reality. Story 98. No thank you. Gender roles were challenged by women, and now we are here, we are not going back. Equality prevails. Story 99. The complaint isn't that we are finally allowed to not be men. It's that many of us feel we are not allowed to be who we are. We are often insulted and belittled for being born the way we are. We have fewer legal rights, privileges, and protections than any other group and are treated unfairly. While not having to act like a man may be a relief for some, many of us naturally act and feel like men, and negative attitudes prevent us from being ourselves. Story 100. The primary value of a man throughout history has been, and likely always will be, the utility he provides and his ability to reproduce. Traditional patriarchal traits have been vital to the development of humankind from primates to what we have become now. As our cultural consciousness grapples with modern understandings of such basic traits, there is reasonable suspicion that skills like using tools to fix things, being physically strong, and potentially intimidating could be lost. It is not just about a willingness to protect and provide for a partner. It is also about the ability to perform the associated tasks. Can you fix a broken shelf? Can you diagnose household appliance issues without a service call? Can you change a flat tire or the oil in your car? Can you lift your partner above your head? Could you hunt or forage for food effectively enough to survive? Those simple instincts still matter in a very real way. We are one significant event away from a large part of our population struggling with daily life. Story 101. I always ask myself, what is a real man? My grandfather worked the fields and mines from the age of 8 and never learned to read. He was an honorable man, but what a life. My other grandfather was an entrepreneur, respected by everyone and well known, Yet behind closed doors, he was a raging alcoholic who cheated on his wife. I know plenty of hardworking, honorable men with strong principles from that time, but I also know many lazy, entitled, misogynistic, abusive, and downright foolish men from that period, as well as from my father's generation. I want us to be better men. The world changes. It's absurd to expect everything to remain static. Story 102. People often glorify the past because they feel unhappy and prefer to believe that it was better. Many women claim they were born in the wrong era. However, unless you were rich or noble, your life would likely have been quite difficult. Instead of watching movies or reading books about famous individuals, who are, by definition, exceptions, consider reading works by actual historians. Story 103. You can find criticism from the 13th century about how the younger generation is abandoning traditional masculinity to prance and mince in their fancy shoes. There is no shortage of older individuals upset that young people aren't like them. I am old. I used a chainsaw and a semi-automatic firearm while still in middle school. I grew up playing with knives and axes. I used to whittle with a jackknife on the playground and settled arguments with my fists well after high school. My first job involved a Pulaski tool, and my second a nail gun. Turns out none of that makes me manly. It just makes me someone from a specific point in time. It certainly does not make me manlier than someone who didn't engage in those activities. It just means my body aches a lot from the damage I did when I was young. Story 104. Nobody. Stop being weak. Animals invade the Western world, and you cannot stand up for yourself. Something breaks in your home, and you have to call someone else to fix it. You have opinions, but you are too afraid to express them because you might upset someone. Men used to plan revolutions, defend a person or an idea with their lives, and stand against adversity and potential danger for respect. The very world you live in was built by real men. Nobody is tired of capability and prosperity. You are just incapable and conditioned to believe it's acceptable. Story 105. If someone wants to pursue an art degree and wear all pink, who cares? Let them live. However, Reddit exhibits a strong opposition to engaging in any form of physical work or exercise, which is quite ridiculous. Whether it's a fight or simply going to the gym, the current attitude of neglecting self-care is nonsensical. The gym can't fix everything, but it will help. Story 106. When wars are waged, men are the ones forcibly drafted. Create a law regarding being a true daughter of the country, and send female soldiers to the front lines, not just to support roles in medical, administration, legal, or logistics positions. Story 107. As a real man, it is a bit strange that these individuals are trying to redefine manhood to resemble something from the 17th or 18th centuries. Story 108. This has been something that has drained my confidence for years. I've endured so much simply because I thought it was the appropriate thing to do. Looking back, I'm surprised I've made it this far in one piece. Going forward, let's agree to do what's best for us, not what an outdated culture dictates. Story 109. I have never truly felt manly. I do not consider myself feminine, but I have never done or experienced anything that made me feel manly. Am I alone in feeling this way? Story 110. Unique perspective. I believe it relates to convenience. In the past, it was convenient for women to know men who were proactive and accomplished. Story 111. We have a revisionist view of history when we think of the past. The real men we discuss were not like that by chance but by circumstance. They were just as flawed as we are now, if not worse, in their relationships with women. Story 112. Most men I have heard talk like that are super insecure. They are afraid to wear pink, cannot say certain words like splendid, and cannot show affection to their children. Story 113. Yes, because the people with that perspective are selling something. Be a good person, work hard at whatever you need to do, and take care of those around you. That is what they are suggesting, but it seems oddly focused on gender. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.